Hello, and welcome to the League of Canadian Poets 2021 Feminist Caucus in Conversation series. My name is Aisha Chatterjee, and I'm chair of the Feminist Caucus. This year, we're delighted to have as host Renée Sarojini Saklikar. Renée is a poet and lawyer who lives in Vancouver on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. Her collection, Children of Air India, won the Canadian Authors Association Poetry Prize, and she's also co-author of the poetry and essay collection, Listening to the Bees, which won the Independent Publisher Book Awards Gold Medal in 2019 in the Ecology Environment category. In each of this year's 3 podcasts, Renée invites a pair of Canadian poets to sit down with her and talk about what she aptly calls compassionate feminism. The Feminist Caucus is very proud to provide space to these strong voices from across the country and for these conversations.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Renée Sarojini Saklikar, and I am so honored with that introduction. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Leslie Fletcher from the League of Canadian Poets. This is the Feminist Caucus League of Canadian Poets podcast conversation series, and this is our first one. It's Sunday, November 21st, and I am honored to be on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the lands of the following nations: the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam. And I'm also feeling so much gratitude this morning as there's a little respite here in our West Coast climate from the torrential rains and flooding, at least in the southern coast, and a little bit of sunshine. So before I introduce 2 amazing poets, Heather Birrell and Phoebe Wang, I'm just going to frame our conversation with what we're kind of going to be riffing on, which is compassionate feminism. So these are tough times we live in. Pandemic inequities and our climate change emergency. Boy, have we ever felt that in spades this week out here. And of course, the ongoing pain of racial and economic injustice are acting, I think, for feminists, for poets, for writers, for creators, as clarion calls to action. And in today's conversation, we're zeroing in on the topic of compassionate feminism and how we as poets can embody this idea, particularly given the fractures and pain that I've been referencing. As a poet and as a woman of color, I've been really conscious of this idea of taking care of ourselves and of each other, even as we might be challenged to have very difficult conversations. So without further ado, I'm just going to pause to say, welcome, Heather Birrell.
Hi, it's so great to be here.
And thank you so much. And welcome, Phoebe Wang.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a great day. Thank you for listening.
And I'm going to begin by a little bit of formality where I read the biographies of these very interesting, thoughtful poets. I'm going to begin with Heather, and I'm going to read the biography, and then I'll proceed to Phoebe, and I'll read her biography. And I might, shortlist all the many award citations and so on. But I just want our listeners to get a sense of the gravitas of these creators. It's, again, a real honor to be in conversation with them. Heather Birrell is the author of a collection of poetry, Float and Scurry, Anvil Press 2019, and 2 story collections, both published by Coach House Books, Mad Hope and I Know You Are, But What Am I? The Toronto Review of Books called Mad Hope completely enthralling and profoundly grounded in an empathy for the traumas and moments of relief of simply being human. And to me, that is just everything. Heather's work has been honored with many awards, including the Journey Prize for Short Fiction, the Edna Stabler Award for Creative Nonfiction, and she has a long list of shortlists. Her personal essays deal with grief and motherhood. It has been said with grace and humor, don't we all need that? And she has many other things she's done, including an essay about rereading C.S. Lewis's Narnia books in the wake of mental illness, which was a notable mention in the Best American Essays 2017. Her workshops, which she gives as a high school English teacher and creative writing instructor in Toronto, where she lives with her family, strive to create a sense of permission and play in a relaxed and open atmosphere. She's drawn teaching inspiration for surrealist poet Stuart Ross, spoken word artist and writer Andrea Thompson, and cartoonist and writer Linda Barry, and the many teachers and students she has encountered in the public school system through the years. You can learn more about Heather and her work at www.heatherburrell.com. Woof! Isn't that amazing? And now I'm going to read the biography of Phoebe Wang. She is a first-generation Chinese-Canadian writer and educator. I have long been interested in her work, and I am so thrilled to have her as part of this conversation. Her collection of poetry, Admission Requirements, published with McClelland and Stewart in 2017, was nominated for the Trillium Book Award. Waking Occupation, her second collection, is forthcoming in the spring of 2022. Woo! She works at OCAD University as a writing and learning consultant and is recently the writer in residence at the University of New Brunswick for 2021-2022. Her work employs a lyric mode and is concerned with the interrelation of place, time, and identity. And Phoebe seeks to heal the rifts of colonization and trauma with language. I think she's a tremendous advocate for BIPOC voices, and she has many other details to her biography, but I'm going to move into now actual conversation by beginning with poetry, which was a suggestion from both these very talented poets. Before I do so, I just want to ask both of them, because I know how reading of biographies can be a very framing experience. Heather, did I miss anything that you wanted to add?
Yes, you did. And it's important because this is a League of Canadian Poets venture. And that is that my collection, Float and Scurry, won the Gerald Lampert Award. And so I think maybe it was my fault. I didn't have that in my bio that was readily available, but it's something I'm very proud of and
As
honored by.
As you should be. I'm so glad you pointed that out. And there were so many awards. Perhaps it's entirely my omission. Thank you. Anything else, Heather, that you'd like to add?
No, that was lovely. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Phoebe, did I miss something? Anything you want to add?
Oh yeah, I just joined the Fiddlehead Poetry Board. And we have a BIPOC solidarities issue coming out in winter, so I wanted to mention that so you can look out for that issue, which we are just putting together and getting the cover art ready. I actually was a judge in the Gerald Lampert last year, and I was nominated for it like when my book came out, so it was really nice to spend that year reading all the new books that came out during the pandemic, so it kind of brings it all full circle. The League has definitely done so much for supporting like particular first-time poets, I think.
Absolutely. So generous. I'm really stoked to hear more about this BIPOC issue of Fiddlehead. A long time coming, if I may say. Please do put me on your distribution list for that. And so thrilled that you're out there in New Brunswick. All right. I am now going to ask Heather, if she would, to read a poem that maybe perhaps touches on this theme of what hurts, what helps, what heals, as an animating centralist question for compassion and feminist compassion. Heather, you up for it?
I'm totally up for it. Thank you. So the poem I'm going to read is a new poem. Who knows if it's finished yet, but it's new. It's called Hesperus. Some Sunday mornings, when my mother came stumbling down to the kitchen, her terry cloth robe fighting to stay roped to her body, her whole self listing with fatigue, my father would look up from his newspaper and a plate now empty of egg and say, "My God, woman, you look like the wreck of the Hesperus." Here are some other things my father used to say. "You're big enough and ugly enough to do it yourself." He believed we were all as beautiful and as ugly as each other. "At least I don't beat you with a stick." Not a threat, an echo. Dinna get your knickers in a twist. Calm down. These sound like horrible things to say. Maybe they are. How to proceed. In the crook of last night's elbow, I invented lines of such prophecy they propped open my brain. But this morning, gone. At 10 a.m., I ate a Klondike bar, soft cakey biscuit giving way to sweet simulacrum of cold vanilla. I wondered how my 13-year-old could look at me with sizzling hatred, then turn to the dog, her face a glistening pie plate of adoration. Thought also of lost nouns. Where do they end up? Forlorn, unaccompanied by definite or indefinite articles. Tangled, like the metal things at the top of fences. Lattices? No. Wrought ironish and delicate, they still exist in the Outer Hebrides, the only place they didn't melt them down to make weaponry for war. And oh, I wish I could see again the way my father looked at my mother, the wreck of the Hesperus, washed up on his godforsaken shore. Thank you.
Wow. I just want to hold oral space for that tremendously fantastic poem, beautifully read and constructed, echoing with a complex compassion, sort of indictment and compassion all at the same time. It was stunning. Yeah, just hold a bit of space there for that. I think people will be eager to see it in print and hold it in their hands. Phoebe, did you want to read a poem for us?
Yeah, I would love to. I also really love that little fragment in Heather's poem that asked how to proceed. I feel like that grounds my life. And I actually also have a poem about my mother. Let's see. So this poem is called, it's from my new collection coming out in the spring, and it's called Still Life with Allegorical Intent. Beyond the finite edge of the snowy mold-made paper and the afternoon closing like movie credits, she hears with a buried ear the key shifting in the bolt, the cheerful feet on the stairs, the tap sighing, her daughters climbing towards that part of her that can be summoned out of a makeshift studio. She comes back to us, not like a wayfarer, breathless with recounting, but speechlessly, disinclined as a gardener in the congealed, bone-dry season to acquaint us with harshness. We begin to guess that there's a lesson in the way her back is turned to us, that divisions are inevitable as doorways. And yet, wherever she has been, she returns seamlessly, rising from the hard black chair as if it were an easy thing to rinse her attention from its demands, as if it were usual to stalk asymmetry and grace with pools of sepia and gum arabic, to be a wedge between a starved life and a saturated one.
Wow, exquisite. I just want to hold some space there for both these poems. So lovely, haunting, delicate, and yet fierce, which is how I experience Phoebe's work. And Heather, I'm wondering if that poem you just read, a new poem, is it part of a series?
No, it's not. Although it probably could be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am going to read a poem just in the moment of listening to you, a short one of origin to set our sense of compassion for family and origins and the imperfection of who we are, which I heard so powerfully in these two poems. This is from my previous book, The Legend of the Bees, co-authored with bee scientist Dr. Mark Winston. And The Legend of the Bees is tied to my own origins as a South Asian, and it's a little sonnet, and I will read it. And then I'm really interested in hearing from our two poets to begin with. When we think about feminism and compassion, what are you both doing for self-care? So maybe hold that as I share with our listeners The Legend of the Bees. Lotus petals folded open, floating, that name forgotten, servant girl dancing, warmed copper pot. A drop of oil swirled, poured, those shadow puppets, papery thin, cut, stingless trigona, bohemia tree planted, earthenware, and enormous. Above, the bees, hind legs bundled with white pollen, baby, red patyana sari wrapped, untied, ankles released, brown eyes ready to focus, that threshold, long beans after flowers, hollowed, dry stem above the trunk. That's how they'd get in, to nest, and then would fly out, circling above, forehead untouched, sweet emanations, just beyond reach, endless.
Thank you.
So good to share Sunday morning with poetry and conversation. So I'm really curious, Heather, this pandemic is stretching on. I believe are you right downtown in Toronto? Are you 416 or are you 905?
I'm 416, yeah.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And thinking about self-care, because our overall topic is compassion and compassionate feminism. And what sort of things are you doing to be compassionate to yourself?
It's funny when you first sort of raised that question, my immediate response was not enough. I'm not doing enough. And I feel in some ways like this point that we're at, and maybe it's just where I'm at in terms of my job and the juncture that we're at, and where I'm at in my family life. But there's this expectation that things are going back to normal. And I'm back teaching in the classroom full time. I'm a high school teacher, and I have a pretty long commute to my job, which I do on the TTC. So I feel like in so many ways, the outside world is back to normal, which I appreciate. I love being back in the classroom and being face to face, but that we are still wrestling so much with fallout from the pandemic, and this kind of, and it's like everything's sort of being allowed now to emerge. So there are these contradicting expectations, and one is that we go back to normal, and the other is that somehow we process everything. And I've had a few people, I think all women, I must say, sort of secretly admit to me, well, I hated the lockdown, but part of me sort of yearns for another one. I need another lockdown just for a few weeks, just so I can kind of catch up. And so I feel like, as I said, what I'm doing for self-care, maybe the beginnings of self-care are sort of recognizing, where I'm at, and that those expectations are unrealistic. And, when you go from only being able to, or feeling comfortable doing one errand a day, to having to do about 16, that there are going to be consequences for your mental health and for your just your sense of rhythm, I think. So I don't know, that's kind of a a non-answer, but
You're getting so many nods from us. It is rich, complex, and it's fascinating in its absence because you have identified, I think, what I just read on a CBC News bulletin this week about the toll the pandemic is taking on women. And so many things, Heather, that you've expressed about that yearning, as bad and terrible as it was. And we were so frightened without vaccines. Longing for a pause is what I heard. And the burdens that you have just identified, the commute, the holding space for kids in a classroom. And you did not identify what are, like, do you sleep in? Do you make scrambled eggs? Is there something, my heart is just aching for you. Is there something you're doing for yourself?
Yes, and it involves British mystery shows.
Which ones? Which ones?
Oh, which ones haven't I watched? I watched them all, and
Morse,
I also
Lewis,
Morse, Endeavor,
Endeavor.
the young Morse, Grantchester, all the PBS ones I've been watching. They're my escape, I have to say. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think also I identified that during the pandemic, I was reading mystery novels, and I realized it was because I was so comforted by the formula, like no matter how awful and grisly they were, that there was going to be some kind of resolution and they were going to catch the bad guy at the end. And there was something really, and I think that's what those mystery shows do too. I mean, okay, done and dusted by the end. Not like this dragging on feeling that we're all living through.
Indeed. And you also, in the midst of your wonderfully rich evocation of life in the so-called air quote new normal, that you said something so important about maybe the first step to self-care is just articulating and maybe journaling, maybe sharing as you have so richly this complexity of what it's like to be a woman in 416 teaching on the TTC. It was gripping to me, and I'm sending many, many waves of hope that you will get cozy time. And I'm going to turn to Phoebe now and first say, Phoebe, did you have responses to what you heard before I'm going to lob the same question to you?
Yeah, definitely. I feel as though, what Heather was saying is that during the pandemic also revealed the lack of compassion in the world for the workers, for women, for students, for so many vulnerable groups in our society. And as though we need another, maybe not physical lockdown, but some kind of spiritual slowdown where we begin to address what came to light during the pandemic that was always kind of broken before. And I think to answer that question about self-care, I was thinking a lot about how it's still a pretty new concept. I don't think I'm doing self-care correctly.
Tell us more. Tell us more. What do you think you're not doing correctly?
Because it becomes a nagging thing to do. It becomes, I have to take care of myself. It becomes another thing to do on your to-do list. And I am so accustomed to doing to generating projects. That's usually what makes me very happy, is to collaborate with people and to support my community and generate projects. But what is good for the people around me, or these kinds of projects that I tend to proliferate, is not good for my physical and mental health. And so I am my own worst enemy when it comes to like taking care of myself, because the things that excite me are often like writing. I was just thinking the other day, or even I think for a while, maybe since I launched my first book, how writing as a profession is very damaging to my health. It's not healthy kind of thing, because it is very physically demanding. I end up staying up quite late and quite get anxious over drafts. I feel guilty over not meeting like deadlines. Traveling and promoting can be very like taxing on the body. Performing, so all of those things are actually quite like detrimental to one's health. So it's a constant like push and pull. Like the less running I do, actually, the more I can take care of myself, or the less that I do for people around me, or for my community, or for students, then the more I can take care of myself. So I think now I'm still trying to find that balance with saying, so during the pandemic, like I did, and actually even before the pandemic a little bit, I started to like use all my benefits. For example, go to massage. Of course, I ended up agreeing to read the poems of my massage therapist, which was really fun. I was so happy to do that. But I'm like, why, Phoebe? And I was going to like osteopaths and like naturopaths to have someone to talk to about my health. And then during the pandemic, I was doing a lot of walking in the area that I lived in was Birrell Village. So I actually saw lots of bees. There's a lot of lavender. There's a lot of people in Birrell Village that love to grow, have bee gardens or gardens that attract insects. So there were tons of bees here, and so I've been able to like walk new trails here in Fredericton, which is like Woolstakieg and Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy territory, and just getting to know the land is a part of, I think, my way of self-care. I love activities that kind of go on the endless loop. Meaningless loops are totally my thing. So knitting, swimming lanes, back and forth. I really missed that during the pandemic. Rereading, like again, old like, novels and things I used to like YA novels I used to read. I reread all of them during the pandemic. I still find them really soothing. What else is like an endless loop? Sailing. It's like a pointless activity where you just kind of bob around the lake, but it was very satisfying. So those types of things have been kind of my self-care, but I'm still figuring out like what is self-care, what does it look like for me, what does it look like for other people around me.
Mm-hmm. So complex. I'm just like nodding my head and wanting to harvest all of these comments that are thoughtful and nuanced and very helpful and very practical. The endless loop activity, which I think in Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, we're activating and soothing the left and right hand side of the body. And also your comments, I think both of you, about compassion and self-care in a pandemic is also about taking care of the body, and that writing is tough on the body, just the stationary aspect of it, and then the anxiety of it, and then the exhaustion of it. Trying to bring a book out, as both of you have done in a pandemic, as I have just done in July, it's crazy. And yet production and creative production and labor is also very generative and can be very restorative. So much there. Heather, I wondered if you had any responses to Phoebe.
Definitely. I would second the walks and how helpful they are and were. And I think maybe part of my sort of shift back into sort of the 9-to-5 commuting world is that I don't have that. I used to, I was teaching online, but there was a sort of hour and a half break in the middle of the day where I could go for a walk with the dog. And it was so lovely. And I miss that so much. It was very grounding. And I think that idea of knowing the land around you is self-care, and as is slowing down enough to notice what's going around in your sort of immediate vicinity, and then having the time and maybe the sort of emotional wherewithal to think about your neighbors and greet them. And I don't know that we often have that when we're sort of back in the busy world that we've sort of set up for ourselves. And I think another thing that occurs to me is the idea of sort of, like you said, I'm not sure if I'm doing self-care right. I think I'm doing it wrong. And I think it's very common for women to blame ourselves and have trouble forgiving ourselves for what we're doing wrong, even with these things that are supposed to somehow be helping us and relaxing us. And I think so much of, being able to sort of spread compassion out into the world is first being able to forgive yourself for what you're messing up or what you perceive to be messing up. And I also feel like this sort of, I feel like there's a sort of perfectionism within me that very much comes from maybe a sort of, I don't know, colonialist sort of white supremacist sort of mindset too. This idea that everything has to be perfect and in place, and a kind of like individual, a criticism of the self that then very easily ripples out to a criticism of others, so that's something I've been thinking about too. Like, how do I forgive myself, and at the same time not. Like, I think if I forgave myself too much, I would never leave my bed with my potato chips. Like, I don't know. I have to have a balance there. So, yeah, those are all thoughts that came up listening to you, Phoebe, for sure. And also, we're neighbors. I live. I know you're not in Toronto now, but I live in the High Park area. So,
yeah, the High Park is so lovely. Yeah, I was like around Runnymede and Dundas West, and I'm also a recovering perfectionist. I had like a long period of writer's block in my 20s because I was such a perfectionist, and then I was an ESL teacher for a while as well, and so it was endless. Like, you could just plan and plan and plan, and you need to make one more activity in case they finish that one. And so I think I'm still dealing with it. It comes back, like my introversion, has these like flare ups, like a zit or something, like, try to like tamp it down. But I think the how I deal with perfectionism is that things also just have to be finished.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it can be good, or it can be done. So I'm like, let's just focus on getting it done. And then later on, if I have more capacity, I'll worry about it being good. But yeah, so I think that helps a lot. But I wonder how much of the perfectionism too comes from people like our mothers. I don't want to blame my mother, but my mom held herself and her ideas of being a mother to a very high standard, as though she felt like a failure if we were not, perfectly well turned out and dressed with like hand sewn Halloween costumes and cookies for the bake sale already, and she would sacrifice her own like energy to do that in her own sleeping hours, and that was her model, that she did not have a lot of opportunities for self-care. So I wonder how much of that, like those perfectionism, like where those expectations come from, and how I can try to not have those expectations of the women around me. And to turn that outward, so that we're not passing this behavior onwards. And I do sometimes already see it in the students and in the younger generation, that they are also hold themselves up to a certain standard, which is can be very generative, but it can be very exhausting as well. And I have the feeling I might tell them, like, okay, it's great that you're doing another iteration of this logo design, but you're going to burn out. You need to go sleep right now. You need to go and have something to eat. You need to go for a walk. And it's troubling to me that these cycles are continuing. So it must be for you as well, when you have like students and family that are also that age, like the next generation. I feel so. I don't know if they're better or worse in terms of self-care. At least it exists as a concept for them. So that's good.
Yeah, so many things here from both of you. Heather, I so respect and admire your courage in naming what I also feel as a South Asian from a middle-class Canadian family, this idea of perfection and how it may well be a colonial construct. I do think about that a lot, and that when we are harsh and judgmental on ourselves, how, as both of you have so beautifully said, we can so easily pass that on to others. And Phoebe, your your evocation of what it's like as an introvert and what it can be like to be in this world, which is so fractured. As a woman of color, as an introvert, there are many different tributaries to talk about. I wanted to share this quote for our listeners as a kind of my response to this conversation about self-care, which has been nuanced and rich and compassionate. Here is a poet that, in my earlier docu-poetry days, I think I was quite snide about. It's American poet Mary Oliver. And as I get older, and right now very much in a formalist practice, I turn to my comfort poetry. And here's a quote that I've pasted close to my desk. Our listeners won't be able to see it, but here it is. Therefore, dark past, I'm about to do it. I'm about to forgive you for everything. And I keep that by my desk right now because I've recognized how much self-forgiveness I need every day. So I just wanted to take a pause and ask Phoebe, you've just traveled from your home area to New Brunswick, and you have this residency. And one of my next level of questions was how compassion and feminism can cohere when we think about the people in our lives. And both of you have talked about teaching and students. But this idea of your residency and this centralizing three things that I really wanted to drop on both of you about respect and admiration and curiosity. If you could just sort of keep those in your mind as you share with us, just paint a picture a bit about this residency in New Brunswick. What has it been like for you?
I've done very little writing. It's terrible. It's been well, one thing I think I appreciate is the living in a smaller community in a smaller city. I mean, I can walk downtown in 15 minutes, and I can also walk to campus in about 10 minutes. So, in where I used to live in Toronto, 15 minutes wouldn't even get you to the subway from where I live. So I appreciate that smaller scale of the city and just having new views. But at the same time, I also feel like I'm inserting myself into a community or inserting myself into the territory here. It's a kind of almost like foreign object. But that's been very welcoming. And because I work at OCAD University, I've been working at OCAD University for like 4 years as kind of more of a staff role. My people are university admin. So we had a lot of departmental meetings and committees and things like that. And I think I kind of replicated that situation here at UNB, where I partnered and reached out to some of the different departments and offices here, particularly the International Students Office, who were not even aware that there were writers in residency. So I think part of my role is trying to do outreach for the role, because within the Department of English, it's very well known, and the students, know about the role. But then, like in the wider university, there's not as much awareness. So, given my background in like ESL and ELL teaching, I wanted to kind of grow that role. So I somehow got added onto a anti-racist committee and other projects that I was already a part of at OCAD, and somehow recreated a similar situation of many meetings and projects, which have been really, really valuable. And they don't really have the people on staff to really bring forth a lot of the projects that they want or do the advocacy that they want. So that's been really interesting. And then, so it's really kind of balancing lots of different things and learning. I think next semester I'll probably try to do a lot less. Now that I know how quickly things can fill up, definitely I have to, and Sue Sinclair, who was a coordinator for a program, really warned me, remember to protect your writing time. So there's that balance of trying to do more writing, but also to create community for the role that can be passed on to the next person who takes the role. So I think that's how I'm really finding it. Sometimes those two things can be don't necessarily have to be in contradiction either. Like I just signed up for like a National Novel Writing Month challenge because I connected with a lot of St. John writers who have all these Facebook groups. And so in an attempt to try to bring like the St. John writing community to use the writer in residence services a bit more, because I think they have quite a thriving community that's quite different from their Fredericton, which is a little bit more poetry centered. There's a lot more fiction and creative nonfiction writers in St. John. So sometimes those things can like definitely overlap as well. So yeah, I think it's a very vibrant community for sure. I think they don't have as much of the publishing infrastructure, but so they need a bit more of that kind of like push to start their own publishing projects and things. And you could really, everyone thought I was going to, all my friends in Toronto were sure I was going to move here permanently. Yeah, they all said, oh, okay, well, so we're going to miss you so much. I'm like, I am coming back. It was really strange. And they were just all assuming. I think there's been a wave of Ontarians moving to New Brunswick. So, or a small wave, or like, so maybe that was where it was coming from, but yeah.
Oh, I'm out here, of course, in Vancouver. And one of my delights, and thank you, Aisha and Leslie, for supporting this, was that I wanted to reach out to poets that I hadn't talked to before, that weren't in my ken, but I was kind of interested in, and really get a sense of the region of this country and what was happening regionally. So this has just been fascinating. Heather, I've got several questions for you, but I wanted to give you some space. Did you have any responses or anything you wanted to add on what Phoebe was saying?
Just that I am super impressed that you are able to make those connections and network the way that you are as an introvert. Shout out to my fellow introvert. I think that's amazing. It must be muscles that you've been flexing for a while.
Lots of praise. Like I usually go and say, you guys are just doing so much amazing work. Really valuable. I would love to hear more about it. Yeah. A lot of flattery. Yeah. Which, as introvert, you're usually quite humble. So, that's, and if people get back to you, they get back to you. I've definitely had people not get back to me. So, I just again, exercise compassion. They're probably overwhelmed or they're probably introverted too. They're worried about making a bad impression. So let's just let it go. So whoever gets back to you is the person you're supposed to relate to. And I think I kind of enjoy suffering, so I have to put myself in situations where like I am like really, my soul is just being crushed, and somehow I thrive on that.
Okay, we're chuckling away at the idea of you choosing suffering, but there's so much in that. Heather, I'm so curious. I'm very curious, Heather, about many things, but I wondered if I might ask you about this when, one of these animating thoughts I had for our conversation that we certainly don't have to be tied to, but this idea of respect and admiration and curiosity. And really it was fed by when I read this wonderful statement that you had written, or that someone wrote, collating your biography, that you've drawn teaching inspiration from the surrealist poet Stuart Ross, who I adore, spoken word artist and writer Andrea Thompson, and cartoonist and writer Linda Barry. And I was thinking about the people we respect and admire and are curious about. Can you talk a bit more about those connections?
Sure. I mean, I think I admire those particular artists the way I do because they're not afraid to be vulnerable, and they're very good teachers in their own right. And I've seen some of the work. I mean, I've taken workshops with Stuart, and I think what was really wonderful about working with him was that I started out my writing life as a poet, and I kind of was seduced by prose for a little while, and then came back around to poetry, and I felt a bit intimidated by the poetry world, and I kind of had to go into it with a beginner's brain again, and he helped me to be playful and not to be afraid of making mistakes, which I think is so important when we're learning any kind of new skill or practicing an art. And similarly, Andrea Thompson, who she's a magical teacher. Phoebe, I don't know if you know her because she works at OCAD too, but she just worked wonders with a lot of my high school students, and just seeing the way she was able to, the kids who never in their wildest dreams would have considered themselves writers, and she was able to somehow stoke their confidence in a way that was so beautiful and felt to me like it was returning to what, the roots of poetry should be. And I think that was what, I admired about these teacher poet writers, and what in turn inspired me as a writer. And I think just because of the all-consumingness of my job and my family life, I do have, connections within the writing world, but I don't feel like maybe I'm as plugged in as Phoebe is in some ways. But those are kind of the connections that I have to continue tending to, because they're the ones that are inspirational to me in the little pockets of time that I have.
Yes, yes, the little pockets of time. Oh,
yeah.
big heart air hug. Yes. So thoughtful, both of you. Well, I think we're slowly, unbelievably coming to the end of our time, but it has been an unbelievable honor to get to know you just a little. And I wanted to close by turning to both of you, because you've been so lovely in giving us your time and this topic of compassion and feminism. And I just wondered, either of you, I'll go back to Phoebe, anything that you wanted to add in closing, or a question for our audience, or anything at all, really. I just wanted to give space to you with much gratitude.
I think you had a question earlier we never got to, was the idea of what hurts, what helps, and what heals. And I think we have answered that many times before. But I think what is really hurting us as a community of women is this the impacts of colonialism that is like underlying a lot of our relationships, and putting like certain individuals in relations to power and privilege. So I think doing that is hurting us. But I think I do see a way to heal, and I think that's in the spirit of rebellion against those expectations of how we should be relating to each other, and valuing and what's healing is the relationships, right? So valuing the ways that those relationships and those individual and personal relationships is a way, I think, to decolonize those power relations that like really want to unsettle us. So that's kind of I see. And again, building relationships is also, it's contradictory as well, because it can take a lot of time, right? To spend time to arrange all these things, and like looking at people's manuscripts and coffee meetings and things and that's what I did find actually with community in Toronto. I was very plugged in for a while, mostly I think because of a fact that a lot of my friends and I who are poets were launching our first books. And so we were in events a lot, or going to each other's events a lot, or launching like magazines and publications and chapbooks, and just getting our career started. And so the perception of that was that you had to attend a lot of events. And then when the pandemic happened, we suddenly realized how much of a toll that was taking on our bodies. And just all the socializing was really quite exhausting, and sometimes, performative too. So I think like that is what is happening with myself, and then the poets I know. It's like it kind of narrows down to just those few people that you really know that inspire you, and to focus on those relationships, because it is, it's you have to have time for every relationship is so rich that you need time to almost reflect on that, and reflect on the ways that you want to continue that relationship. And so you can't do that if you have too many of them. And so that it's unfortunate, I think, to have to say that, to say like, oh, I don't have the capacity to build out my community as much as I would like, because I myself am just one person with like only, and I do really like sleeping a lot too. So
So
I need my
important.
sleep. Yeah.
So important. Oh,
So-
so rich, so wonderful, so generous and nuanced. And this idea of capacity, we could do a whole series just on that. Heather, anything that I may have missed or that you wanted to add in response?
I think I really liked something you said in response to my poem, and you talked about it being about both compassion and indictment. And I feel like, yeah, we're in a world now where I think we should strive to always balance indictment with compassion. And that's something, looking at my own family, I'm trying to do, looking at myself, I'm trying to do. And this idea also, definitely what Phoebe was talking about in terms of, building relationships that feel sort of grounded and authentic and that we can sustain without making ourselves sick, like whether that's physically or mentally. And having sort of conversations like this too that feel grounded and honest, and not, as Phoebe said too, like performative. Like it's fun sometimes to go to a lot of events and parties, but it doesn't always feed you in the way that feels real or sustaining. And then I guess finally, I think sort of in terms of a feminist practice of compassion, just like trying to continue to enlarge my idea of what feminism means, and that it includes all human beings and living creatures and the earth, and the idea, I hope I got it right, but I'm pretty sure I was reading, as I'm sure we all have been reading, something that Lee Miracle, who we just sadly lost, said, and the idea that everybody eats, right? that we're big enough to include everybody, and what does that look like? So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And so it's that balance though too, like, making sure that we're not, as Phoebe said, you want to read everybody's manuscript, but you also have to sleep. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for reminding us of the loss of Lee Markle and the profundity of what you've just said. I want to give a big shout out to Heather Birrell. Her latest work is Float and Scurry. I hope you all who are listening will check it out. And Phoebe Wang and her Waking Occupation, forthcoming this spring. I want to give such thanks and gratitude to Leslie Fletcher and Aisha Chatterjee from the League of Canadian Poets and the Feminist Caucus. Please support and consider joining us. We'll be back here again with another podcast. And this is Renée Sarojini Saklikar in East Vancouver on unceded and traditional territories of